This is not my legal name, but this is what everybody calls me. This video is with the purpose to share something in a group. So I'm gonna leave it public though, because screw that, right? In 2010, my beautiful little boys were born. In February, Rowan was born. In December, Rohan was born. Rowan was an emergency C-section, and Rohan was completely unplanned and because my ex-husband was pressuring me. He was not my husband yet. He did, however, tell me that he would kill me and our unborn child if I did not marry him. My family was utterly unhelpful, so I was kind of trapped. So I married him. Stupidest decision of my life. After I married him, other stuff started to happen, besides that. And I looked it up and I found online, give him 6 months. Okay, so I did that. I gave him 6 months to change. It ended up only being 5. He ended up taken away by the cops. I did not tell the cops exactly what he had done as far as that other stuff went. The cop went outside and asked him, without me having said what happened, "Why did you rape your wife?" And he just started blubbering, saying, "I'll never do it again. I can change." And he was just crying and blubbering like they were supposed to feel sorry for him. None of them did. Later on, he would go on to blame us and then later deny it altogether. I found out through an ex-girlfriend of his sending letters, which, by the way, he blames on me, even though I don't even have this information. In fact, I told someone in his family who offered it to me that I didn't want it. And they offered it to me after these letters had already started, because they wanted me to do this too. And I was like, no. If you really care that much, I've written about it on a blog online. I have talked about this, trying to share my story with other people and telling them, get out. Don't even get into this. And just talking about that journey, and what it does to you and why it's wrong, and, just don't ever do this to anybody. And don't ever think that you have to think that this is okay. That sort of thing. I left. I was never going to stay with someone who did that to me. I didn't want my kids to grow up like that. 6 months after I left him, CPS showed up at my door. They got a call saying that I thought that my cat could turn into a person. The fact that I didn't matter. At first, they didn't even identify themselves. They forced their way into my home. They did not ask. They did not wait for an invitation. They did not identify themselves before they were already in my home, acting like they owned it. And had every right to be there. Yeah, no, they didn't. In fact, there was no reason besides you think that your cat can turn into a person. That they even took my kids. I was actually told later that my home was fine. That it was just me. They didn't write down anything specifically that my kids would have needed protected from, but then they put down that my ex-husband failed to protect them from me. But I wasn't accused of doing anything. Or failing to do anything. My kids had food, they were fed, they got a roof over their head, they had clothes, they weren't injured, they were fine, they were thriving. My youngest stopped talking, he stopped babbling. And he'd already said his first words, he was imitating sounds, and he'd actually full on said words. And he stopped. He was 8 months old. which isn't all that unusual, I guess, because I'd done the same thing at his age. Not the stop talking part, but the, I was saying words. They weren't the most, they weren't like in older kids' words, but you could make out what was being said, and I'd taught both of my kids baby sign language. So even then, like, there was still, like, less crying and fussing because they could just say, I'm hungry, or or you would pat his diaper, you know, he was already starting to, communicate, hey, my diaper's wet. Just without the, hey, my diaper's wet, just patting the diaper, I taught them this. I would do these gestures at them whenever I was repeating these things to them. And then I would do the actions. This is how you teach baby sign. You teach the association with these things. And baby sign is something that is a simplified form of sign language. It is simplified specifically to make it so that babies can learn it. Rowan already did this. Rohan was a little better at it because his fine motor skills were a little more better. Rowan was better with gross motor skills. Rohan was better with fine motor skills. Both of my boys had been in early intervention programs to make sure. The lady actually was pretty weird with Rowan walking early and standing early. She would just call it balancing. She was very stubborn about this. And she would write it as if I was crazy for calling it walking. She's like, he's balancing. I'm like, he's making it a couple steps before he falls down. It's not balancing. He's walking. He's just not walking very well. Rowan skipped crawling. He did not want anything to do with this shit. The only way that he would do tummy time was on me. He would not do it on the floor. He would just start screaming. And there was only so long that, you could do this. That there was nothing that would, these were different things about my kids' early life, I guess. After I left my ex-husband, he had supervised visits with them. 2 people would go, and one of these people was my grandfather. The other person was an ex-friend who the kids knew well and who would go with, and her job was to pull the kids away. This was before I knew that she'd done some pretty serious shit. Which she only admitted to me after making the call in the first place, and that resulted in this. Yeah, she called, pretended to be a police officer. It was in retaliation and entirely petty. She was, old enough to be my grandmother, so, you would never expect this. But yeah. She was the one that called and accused me of thinking that my cat could turn into a person. She was also the person who drugged me so that I would miscarry, which was before this, and I'd miscarried, months before this happened, so I wasn't pregnant, and there was no possibility of pregnancy because I wasn't going around having sex. With or without condoms, there was just no sex. So, yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. So, after everything and my kids were in custody, the judge, months after the fact, they would not take it to court. They would not let it get to court. It actually took 4 months, not 3. And they altered paperwork just to pull this off. This is insane. And we went to court, and the judge substantiated it based solely on the fact that they had my kids. There was no trial. I was told that if I said anything, that I would never see my kids again. How do you, testify if you're under duress or not whenever you're under duress not to tell them. Like, what the fuck? And so she substantiated it solely on that. If she had actually looked and followed the law, she would have said, well, why do you have these kids? You're not even saying anything, like, why do you have them? You're only saying that she thinks something. And then I did everything that they told me to. And then at the end, then they, like, said, oh, well, she's not on an antipsychotic. Well, I have PTSD. If you put me on an antipsychotic, it will make me psychotic. You cannot give me antipsychotics because I do not have psychosis. And they were really riding on that, the cat thing. And I was just like, a single call. Really? That's it? That's what it was? That was enough? All they had to do was accuse me of being crazy, and suddenly family advocates and all that became extremely unhelpful. I had, apparently, no applied rights whatsoever, despite the law. My kids were subjected to genetic testing without permission, while rights were still intact. They did not follow the rules for these sorts of things. They did not... I was barred from doctor's visits, everything to do with my kids that I have every right to be there for. I was not only barred from, but then they would go out of their way to just not inform me that it was even happening, so I would not even know until court. If a foster family decided, oh, we want to alienate the parents because we may want to adopt these kids, they would just say, oh, that's at their discretion. Actually, that's a violation of rights, and I know that now, but I was 21 years old and did not back then. So, I was telling people that this stuff was happening, and because I didn't know the exact laws that were being broken, even as I was describing it, I would have the ombudsman who would tell me, like, they would ask me what laws were being broken, and then because I couldn't name them and give a page number for them, they treated me like I was trash because I have a diagnosis. I have PTSD, which apparently to the ignorant means that any accusation against my sanity is automatically true. Even if it had been true, that wouldn't actually be a reason for what happened to us. Because you're supposed to have a way that this had affected their care. And it had, like, they were fine, they were thriving, they were good. And they were healthy, and there was no reason for this. My rights were severed. The judge specifically ordered them not to do it until 18 months, but she allowed them to cut off visits sooner. She never had any intention of doing anything by the book. And I didn't actually find out, and I was actually told whenever my lawyer would not file the appeal that I was not allowed to file pro se. The clerk at the court stopped me multiple times. I was told that I couldn't file paperwork unless I gave a bribe, that I was told wasn't a bribe. I was told that it was payment for filing. I was told that someone could lose their job for filing it. I was told, you can't do that, the judge says so. I actually had, after the 6 months, because I was filing on the basis that there was evidence left out, and that I could prove it, and I could. And that there was also proof that laws had been broken during the case, which I had proof of. And those are grounds to file for an appeal after the 6 months are up. So I did that, and then the clerk came back and said, the judge says that you can't do that. They actually went and asked the judge, and the judge said, you can't do that. That was what she said whenever she came back, and I actually recorded that. And all that fun stuff. So, anyway, there was a lot of stuff that went on, and during the course of the case, the worker told my grandfather that my kids were playing in the litter box, which wasn't true. She said a lot of things to different people that wasn't true. And it also wasn't in the paperwork. Like, why would my kids have been in the litter box? They were actually in their room, taking a nap whenever the worker showed up. I was in the bathroom doing laundry by hand whenever they knocked on that door. Yeah, they knocked. They waited for us to open up the door before they forced their way in. Like, they didn't say, oh, can we come in? Or, we're so-and-so. We need to come in. Like, they didn't even, like, use words. They used physical force. So, they didn't even use verbal coercion. They just forced their way in. So, the worker made me get rid of my dog, who was completely unaggressive, and had all of her shots. She was completely up to date on everything. There was literally no reason. Her only reason was because she didn't like dogs. Later, I dealt with things like I got hazed at the hospital after I collapsed because my clinic would not offer me a bus pass. They refused to give me one, saying that CPS was supposed to, and even though like this was part of the services. And then the worker didn't give me any way to get there, bus pass or anything, and I didn't know that I even had a right to this. Nobody tells you your rights, by the way. They tell you that you have a right to complain if your rights are violated, but they don't tell you what your rights actually are. So, I was young and didn't know. So, I know a lot more now, and I've actually helped other people now. But this is still a thing, and nobody has helped us. Like, nobody said, you know what, I'm gonna look at this case from a legal perspective. Like, there are things in the paperwork itself. You can just using that, you can say, this case had no basis. What is this? Like, you basically just argue that she has a diagnosis, or that she should have a different diagnosis. I mean, I submitted multiple letters from psychiatrists saying that I was completely compliant with treatment and did not have psychosis to even need antipsychotics. And I did everything that they told me to do, and at the end, they claimed that I was uncompliant because I was not on antipsychotics. But I can't have antipsychotics because I'm not psychotic. During the course of the case, I went through different things. If you don't know this about me, without glasses, I can't see shit. So I cannot do things like identify faces from, like, further away than my hand can get from my face. Legally speaking, I actually didn't know this, but I fit the criteria for legally blind without my glasses. I don't use this because it barely fits, but it does. So with glasses, even the shitty ones that are kind of outdated, it's better. But, like, without them, I'm not going to see shit. So I didn't know who was sitting in that red car in front of my apartment. I just knew enough to be able to make out that they had a clipboard, they were writing something down, and that they went away as soon as the cops were coming. And they were following me. I was being followed by this person, and I had reported this to the police, but I couldn't see who was in the car. I couldn't tell you if this person was a man or a woman or anything else. I could just tell you that I saw enough to know that there was a clipboard and a pen, because it was shiny. Like, you learn how to make some things out. But, like, as far as identifying features, I couldn't see those. I couldn't tell you what kind of car it was. I don't even know enough about cars, even if I could see it. So, that's just not my subject. My little brother is the mechanic, not me. I'm not a car person. I can tell you that colors, different shades of colors, and a bunch of other stuff, but that I've, like, researched extensively. But cars are not something I know much about, other than, you know, like, your basics, like how to put gas in, and how to check your oil, or you know, the basic things that you do, you know, trying to avoid going to the mechanic. I can do those things, but don't ask me to identify a car. Other than it's a car, or a truck, or a van, or a minivan. Don't ask me more than that. Because if I'm not close enough to see the person in the car, probably not close enough to see if the brand is printed across it. Anywhere. So, yeah. In court, they accused me of accusing a specific social worker of stalking me. It's funny because I didn't even know who was stalking me. There was someone who had broken into my apartment and stolen the camera that I used to record my visits. And I had both video and audio. And just pictures in general, because it was my camera. Whenever I confronted the managers of my apartment complex back then, I asked them, because they had said that they had cameras and stuff. And whenever it came down to it, the locks had been changed fairly recently. So, nobody even had the key except for me. Nobody should have the key except for me. So, they were like, well, did you give the key to anybody? No, I haven't given the key to anybody. And they finally just said CPS can do whatever they want. And I'm like, what? They have a right to search your home. And I'm like, what? I'm like, you gave them a key? They have every right to search it whenever you're not home. What? Yes, we gave them a key. And I'm like, oh my god. I don't know who it was still to this day, because the only thing I can tell you about them is that their clothes were really nice, and that they had heels on because they were trying to be sneaky and big, clunky, loud-ass heels. Okay, and I was walking up as they were, so skulking off, not even knowing how to play it cool. They were just the most suspicious person ever. And my camera was missing, and my USB was missing with different paperwork and stuff on it. Even the disc I got with the paperwork on it after requesting records was missing. What the fuck? These people were taking paperwork. They were taking different things that made no sense for them to even want to take unless they were trying to make me sound crazy. And the thing of it is that some of this stuff is mentioned somewhere, but I couldn't directly talk about it, or that I knew that they were responsible for it, because I was being accused of being crazy. And that automatically made it that if I said that it was them, I was crazy. I never said that it was them. That one never came up in court. But the one with the stalking did. I did find out that they were calling my work. They were calling my clinic, told them that I was doing porn. A naked picture of me doesn't even exist. I've never done porn. Why would I do porn? Like I said, a naked picture of me doesn't. I have not even sent a picture with tits in it. I have never even done a picture topless. Okay? There's no porn of me anywhere. No, it just doesn't exist. So that was how they got them to be completely unsupportive. My grandfather was told some other weird thing, and he was like, nah, that's not true. It also wasn't in the paperwork. My lawyer was useless, and a lawn ornament would have been a more appropriate term, because all she was there for was looking pretty and just nodding her head. Just letting things happen. Rights were being violated, and she was just like, this judge won't care. All of her arguments were against, submission of evidence, of further evidence. She's like, nah, what's here is enough to prove that they have no case. Would it hurt to strengthen that? Because they did criminal actions during the course of this case. And, I was told different things. After having complained about being stalked, I called and asked if they had an update of that. And all I got was stuff about how CPS can do whatever they want. And I'm like, I never accused them of stalking me. I couldn't even see well enough to identify who was even stalking me. Okay? But apparently it was a CPS worker who was literally stalking me trying to find things to complain about. But, like, she failed to find things to complain about. So... what was even the purpose of that?
Why are you asking?
In the end, the judge really didn't care. They got to the 18 months, she got her stupid funding consequences like she wanted, and my kids are out there somewhere. Probably thinking that I gave up or just didn't do something. I kept a blog. I had a YouTube channel, Dark Lady in the Moon. The blog was True Moons on Blogspot. I think my thing at the top was the truth comes out a little at a time. And there were things that, there's a lot of entries about my history and whatnot, and different things that had happened in the past. Mostly because I have PTSD in part, and I was actually still dealing with that, even just... But it didn't affect my parenting, obviously, because my kids were fine, and if they couldn't specifically find something to complain about, then yeah, they were fine. The only thing that they were really saying is that I was crazy, and then in the end, they had so little that their guy, even as he admitted that I was very bonded to my children, he claimed that I had a disorder that renders you incapable of bonding. And that was the basis on which they based severing my rights. Yeah. And then I had this disorder that rendered someone incapable of bonding. Even though everyone there admitted that me and my kids were very bonded, that separating us would be very damaging to the kids and me, and they just didn't care. The judge didn't care as long as she got her funding consequences. The workers were like, oh, this is a special case. No, it isn't. This is actually pretty routine in this state. Or at least it was back then. I know that this stuff still happens. But it's usually behind closed doors with lots of gag orders, which gets me to another point. While I am talking in the blogs, I am also specifying that I am mixing things. I'm not actually mixing it with fantasy, though. I'm mixing it with my twin sister, who wasn't actually born. And I did this for one specific reason. One, because it's two birds with one stone. I still get to agonize over the fact that I've always sort of felt where she's supposed to be. And I've only in recent years learned that this is actually fairly common for some twins to feel. My mom had actually confirmed her existence whenever I was little, because I had dreams about her, and I even asked about her by name. And I asked my mom why she hadn't named me Luna. And she had confessed that before she had miscarried my sister, she was going to name us Luna and Serenity. And, that didn't happen, obviously. So, yeah. My dad actually used to call me La Lune. And out here, that's not really easy to understand because it's, French. So, Luna. And it sort of works out, I guess. Whenever I was little, I couldn't pronounce La Lune either, so I'd say La 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 Luna. And then I would tell my mom that it meant singing moon because I like to sing. So my dad called me a word that he said meant the moon, and then I would just add la's on it instead. So I was very little, and that was my logic. Little kids, huh? So, yeah. So I used that in the Dark Lady, it was Luna, Artemis, and Diana. I think it was Luna, Artemis, Diana. That was the DeviantArt, I think. The blogspot was True Moons, and YouTube was Dark Lady in the Moon. All of these accounts were hacked. I cannot get into the Gmail that was connected to it. I cannot get any of the accounts. The Facebook connected to it was Luna Serenity Campbell, for obvious reasons. I mean, I'd had it that way for quite a while before this happened. My MySpace was hacked, which had pictures of my kids as well. I was never actually able to get that back. And just most of my online accounts were hacked. While this was going on, my personal computer actually ended up hacked as well. Files specifically that had, it seemed, keywords in them ended up corrupted. Only the ones I'd managed to back up online were otherwise. Okay? Like the video with my son with bruises on his face. I was hacked, and the image was just blurs. The original video should still be, unless whoever hacked it got rid of it, in the private videos on my old YouTube account. But yeah, I dealt with stuff like that. Like, the images were distorted, but you could still hear what was being said. Like, the audio was fine on that one, but the video was gone. So I had someone who was actively attacking me, and I couldn't even speak up because I was being called crazy. And whenever you're being called crazy, you can't do that. Otherwise, people will just call you crazy for it. They'll say, nah, nobody's attacking you. Why would anybody do that? Well, I don't know. I didn't know if it was the foster family, if it was the workers. I didn't know if it was just someone completely unconnected who was just in complete support of this. I don't know. All I know is that somebody did this, and that the files that were corrupted were too specific for it not to be targeted, because other files were left completely alone, and it was only files specifically to do with them. So there were actually entire folders of pictures of my kids that just up and disappeared. And not all of them were backed up. So as you can imagine, nowadays, I back up photos of my stepson religiously. I want my kids home. Still want them home. There's never a day I won't love them. In fact, I keep documenting my life every day online in hopes that one day they will know me. Like, if they want to know me, if anything happens and they can't, like, there isn't a person around anymore to get to know, they will have a way to know me if they want to. That's what I do with my journal on DeviantArt. It's what I've done whenever we couldn't afford to keep internet after I got laid off on YouTube. It's what I do. I spend pretty much most of my free time doing that. I spend sleepless nights laying awake wondering if my kids are alive or dead. Wondering if they hate me or think that I gave up on them. I walk around with this pain that is so intense. You ever felt heartbreak so bad that you can feel it, like, physically? It's almost like you can't breathe. I have to walk around with that every day, like my heart has been ripped out of my chest, and I have to keep going. And there are people who will say things like, oh, they'll find you one day, but not everyone does. Gene never found his family. My kids may never find me, and they may never want to. They may have fears, because not everybody wants you whenever you find them. I could never not want my kids. But my surviving family members didn't really want anything to do with me. I can attest to that. And I can say that that hurt. I watched a friend of mine be utterly destroyed. Because while her family wanted her, her mother blamed her for everything and just didn't deal with it. And the way that she dealt with it was to reject her daughter. I could tell you that from all the books that I've read that it was a very defensive response and that her intention was not to hurt her daughter. And that she probably would have reacted differently if she thought that it would do that. But the reality is that she gave up on life. She turned to trying to kill herself with her diabetes. She drank an entire gallon of Tampico and did not take any insulin. She ended up multiple times in the hospital for that. In the end, the damage from multiple attempts is what killed her. The hospital, because she had no history of mental health history, as opposed to someone who just ends up there for an accident, like, if they have a history, they would totally just put you on lockdown. But she had no history, so they weren't helpful at all about this. In the end, the continuous damage got to her, and the damage to her body had accumulated from this. And she died in her sleep, which was exactly what she wanted. And it was exactly what she kept on talking about. Because the moment her mother had rejected her was the moment she decided she didn't want to be alive anymore. Because she wasn't living. That's what she said so many times. And she's gone. You know, there are stories like that. There's no good stories about families who end up touched by CPS. In her case, her mom was accused of not giving her insulin as a kid, and that's what had started all that. She was very adamant, though, that her mom had never done that, but her family had followed along with it. And she had a lot of pain because they just wouldn't stop looking down on her mom. They wouldn't stop saying, well, it's her fault. It's her own fault. You know, and she had to listen to this. She just wanted her family to get along. She really just wanted them to not do these things. So she was already dealing with this, and then her mom, rejected her, and she was just like, I have no reason to live. So now, we've got, another reason why for her family to fight, and I'm just thinking of how much she's probably rolling in her grave, because that was pretty much what she became because of them. And because, you know, people turn on one another whenever CPS becomes involved. And she had to live with that for the rest of her life. And then she decided that wasn't worth living for. People do these things. Whenever I was a kid, there were therapists that realized that there was very heavy abuse going on in my grandparents' house. My grandfather was oblivious, but I can't say that everyone was. And there was a couple in particular who said that they could call CPS and they would take me away. And I told them that if they did that, I would kill myself. There was one who did not believe me. So they acted like they were calling. So I stood up and I put a knife to my throat. And just like the time my grandmother pretended to call, there was blood. Because I wasn't kidding. The therapist actually was... Well, now that I'm an adult, I recognize that she was in a little bit of shock. But what had happened to me while I was in care was so horrific that I just, as a kid, I was just like, I'm not going back. I will die before I go back. Because, you know, even the family members who aren't complete shit, they'll separate me from them too. And, you know, I'll go through all this stuff again, and I'm not going through this. I'm not going back. I would rather live with this than live with them. You know? And I don't think that they were used to seeing that kind of conviction. And that's what it was, because I didn't really want to die. It's just that the alternative was worse than death. So, faced with a rock and a hard place, you know, you have no way out but death. What do you choose? That was, I think that if I was faced with that sort of decision again, I don't know what I would do. Because I'm older now. And I'm kind of like against harm, and that's considered harm, so I don't know. I couldn't say. But I can honestly say that even as a kid, I had more conviction than some of these fuckers. I realized that for some people this wasn't, like, they didn't know how to deal with it. That I wasn't just going to, like, kick and scream and protest it, you know, in a way that they could just medicate away. No, I was going to deal with it permanently. I don't know. I was probably like Chris's age. And all I knew was that I would die before I went back. The stuff that I had gone through in CPS custody was so horrific. And the only thing that I wanted the entire time I was there was to go home. And they wouldn't let me go home. So I would run away, and I would try and go home. And I just kept on running away. What kills me is that if my kids think that I don't want them, or they've been told a bunch of stupid lies that would make them hate me, here's the thing, you cannot hate your parents without hating yourself. That's something I don't think people like them understand. You cannot hate someone who shares features with you without looking in the mirror and hating what you share with them. And that is what kills me about that. Just imagining that my kids might be looking in that mirror and hating themselves. Or that, what if the bullshit reasoning that they used has been used as an excuse to claim that my kids are deficient in ways that they're not, because that happens too. Whenever I was in state custody, they did that to me. That's what opened up the door for my grandmother to make me sick. To, you know, do the lies that she did. Because they'd already done it. And the thing of it is that my grandmother even tried to, like, retroactively have my mom diagnosed just to justify it. My mom never had a diagnosis. She wasn't sick. What I did find out was interesting, though. My grandmother did have a diagnosis. One my grandfather absolutely refuses to talk about. And I can't talk about how I even managed to dig it up. My grandmother actually did have trouble bonding. And the source was what happened between her mom and her after her dad sexually abused her. And she was shipped off to grandma's. My grandmother did actually have issues, and they were known issues. My grandfather did not protect any of his kids from those issues. So, if you want someone who had issues, my grandmother had them in spades. She saw people as tools, and apparently this was known many years in advance. Like, there was an actual history there. And like I said, I can't even talk about how I know that because I could actually get people in trouble. people could get in trouble for telling me this because it is technically protected information. How I found out was legal, but I cannot confirm or deny whether how they found out was. And that's why I can't say. Because I don't know, and I don't want to know, and I have subscribed to simply not knowing because I don't want to know. I don't. Because I will have a problem with it if it's not legal. But it wasn't something that, like, can hurt anybody, so don't really have a problem with it anyway. But my grandmother actually did have an issue, but her issue wasn't caused by genetics or anything that is hereditary in any way. It was just because she had such horrific experience as a child with the people that she was the most bonded to that she stopped seeing herself and them on the same spectrum. And unlike people who are sort of dehumanized and sort of like get like hit down, my grandmother ended up seeing herself above them and people as tools and feelings as weakness. And you know, there's a point when everybody who goes through that goes through like something that they think like that at some point, but my grandmother took it to a different level. This became part of her core personality, which basically means fuck. She stopped seeing people as people and instead as objects and things to be possessed or controlled and manipulated, and she actually had a diagnosis to go along with us. She ceased treatment, went on, started a family, and unlike a lot of people who really are falsely diagnosed, my grandmother embodied this.